You ever had one of those neighbors who thinks the whole street belongs to them? Well, let me introduce you to Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, who believed her word carried more weight than the county sheriff himself. It all started one lazy Saturday morning when I walked out to grab my mail and saw a sight that made my jaw drop. Karen's shiny beige SUV parked dead center across my driveway. Not beside it, not near it, across it. Like she'd measured the spot just to block me in perfectly. Now, normally I'd knock on a door, have a polite word, maybe even chuckle about it later. But this wasn't my first rodeo with Karen. Last month she'd left a note saying my lawn was emotionally disruptive, whatever that means. Another time, she took pictures of my recycling bins and emailed them to the HOA board, claiming they were facing the wrong direction. So, when I saw her SUV sealing me in like a crime scene, I knew this wasn't an accident. This was war. I called out, "Karen, you parked in my driveway again." Her voice came floating out from her porch, nasal and dramatic. "It's not your driveway. It's community property. You can't tell me where to park. Community property. I had built that concrete pad with my own hands, paid for it, sealed it, and yet, according to Karen logic, it now belonged to the neighborhood collective, like we were in some weird suburban commune." I tried reasoning with her. Bad idea. She crossed her arms and gave me the smug grin imaginable. "If you have a problem," she said, "take it up with the HOA." That's when I decided, fine, I will. But not the way she expected. So, I snapped a few pictures, made sure her license plate was front and center, and called the non-emergency sheriff line. Not to be petty, mind you, but because I physically couldn't leave my house. The dispatcher sounded sympathetic. "We'll send someone out," she said. "Blocking a driveway is a violation." About 15 minutes later, a county sheriff's SUV rolled up, lights flashing just enough to make Karen's head turn. I swear I've never seen someone go from smug to sweating so fast. She marched up, waving her HOA badge like it meant something. "Officer, I'm on the board," she said. "This man is harassing me." The sheriff looked at her, then at me, then at her car, blocking my drive. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you're in violation of local code. Can I see your driver's license, please?" Karen rolled her eyes and made a whole scene of digging through her purse. She muttered something about neighbors who don't understand rules and people not knowing their place. She finally handed over her license, or tried to. The officer took it, walked back to his patrol SUV, and ran her information. Now, I thought this was just going to end with a fine and some awkward silence. But the next few seconds were straight out of a sitcom. The sheriff leaned out his window, radio still crackling, and said, "Dispatch, can you confirm this? Looks like there's an active warrant on this driver." I blinked. "Wait, what?" Karen froze, mid-eye roll. "That must be a mistake," she sputtered, trying to laugh it off. But the sheriff was already stepping out, hand resting on his belt. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle." The look on her face, priceless. Turns out, Karen had an expired bench warrant for failing to appear in court over an old traffic violation. She'd ignored the notices, and probably too busy writing HOA citations for everyone else. The officer explained it calmly, but she wasn't having it. "This is harassment," she shrieked. "I am the HOA president." The sheriff, cool as ice, replied, "Then you should know better, than to ignore official notices. By now, a few curious neighbors had come out to see the commotion. Phones were recording. Karen was pacing, trying to talk her way out of it, but the sheriff wasn't budging. I'll admit, I stood there, trying not to grin too wide. The irony was too perfect. Eventually, he told her she'd need to come down to the station to clear things up. Her car was towed off my driveway, justice in motion, literally. As they loaded her SUV, Karen shouted over her shoulder, "You'll regret this." Maybe I would. Maybe I wouldn't. But at that moment, watching the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac being driven away with flashing lights behind her, I felt like I'd just witnessed karma doing its job with full comedic timing. Little did I know this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up half expecting Karen to show up with pitchforks, petitions, and a lecture about respecting community authority. But surprisingly, things were quiet, too quiet. No barking orders, no HOA notices taped to my mailbox. Not even her usual good morning scream across the street that sounded more like a police siren. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd learned her lesson after her little sheriff encounter. But then I saw it. A brand new laminated sign on the community board near the mailboxes. New HOA rule. No residents may contact law enforcement without prior HOA approval. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. She actually made a rule banning people from calling the cops. That had to be illegal in at least 5 ways, but it was so absurd I couldn't even be mad. I took a picture, sent it to a few neighbors, and within minutes the neighborhood group chat was exploding. Everyone knew who the rule was aimed at me, and it didn't stop there. Later that afternoon, I found an official-looking envelope taped to my door. Inside was a notice of conduct violation. Apparently, I had displayed aggressive behavior toward a board member by existing in my own driveway while she was being arrested. The fine $250. I actually laughed out loud. Karen had guts. I'll give her that. But what she didn't realize was the sheriff's office had already filed a public report of the incident. The moment she tried to find me for it, she was documenting her own retaliation. And that's when I decided it was time to play chess, not checkers. I sent a polite email to the HOA board, not to Karen, but to the other members, explaining that I'd been fined for witnessing a lawful arrest. I attached the sheriff's public report, complete with her name, and the line that said, "Subject had an outstanding warrant." Within an hour, 2 of the board members responded. They had no idea about the no police rule or the fine. Turns out Karen hadn't even run it by them. She'd just printed everything herself, signed it, and pretended it was official. By evening, the board called an emergency meeting. Of course, Karen strutted in like she owned the place, wearing sunglasses indoors, probably hoping everyone forgot about her mugshot making its rounds on Facebook. The moment she sat down, one of the board members, Paul, retired firefighter with zero tolerance for nonsense, cleared his throat. "Karen," he said, "care to explain why you've been issuing fake citations?" Karen tried to spin it. "It's called leadership, Paul. Some of us have to make tough decisions to protect our community from toxic influences." She glared at me like I was a stray raccoon. Paul just blinked. "By toxic influences, you mean homeowners calling the sheriff when someone blocks their driveway." Karen's smile froze. "You're twisting my words." "Your words are printed right here," he said, holding up the fake rule. You even used the HOA logo. That's fraud, Karen. I swear if silence had a sound, it was deafening in that room. Then someone whispered, "She's going to blow." And right on cue, she did. Karen slammed her binder shut. You're all against me. This community's gone soft. You let people build fences, paint their mailboxes, call the police. Where does it end? Paul leaned back, smirking, hopefully, before another warrant shows up. I bit my tongue to stop from laughing, but it was impossible. Half the room was chuckling under their breath. Karen snatched her purse, muttering something about consulting her lawyer, and stormed out. I thought that might be the end of it. But Karen doesn't just back down, she escalates. 2 days later, a random code inspector showed up at my door. Said he'd received a complaint about illegal property modifications. When I asked what modifications, he pointed to my garden hose. Apparently, someone reported it as a non-compliant water distribution structure. I just stood there blinking. You mean my hose? He looked embarrassed. I have to check it off the list, sir. Someone filed the paperwork. Of course, it was Karen. But her plan backfired spectacularly when the inspector saw my security cameras and noticed something odd. The footage clearly showed Karen walking onto my property the night before, taking photos of my backyard, trespassing. The inspector frowned. You said she's on the HOA board, President. I corrected him. He just sighed. You might want to mention that to the sheriff next time. Oh, don't worry. I did. The same deputy who'd arrested her before stopped by later that week. He reviewed the footage, shook his head, and said, "Looks like she didn't learn." That's when he told me something that made my jaw drop. Apparently, when Karen was processed for her warrant, she'd mouthed off at the officers and refused to sign her release paperwork. So, she'd earned herself a pending disorderly conduct review, meaning if she caused one more official complaint, she could face real charges. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Well, that's good to know, because if Karen wanted to play games, I had all the time in the world. And now the law itself was keeping score. But trust me, she wasn't done yet. The next thing she did turned the entire neighborhood upside down. And this time, even the HOA board couldn't save her. By the third week, the neighborhood had turned into a live sitcom. People were watering their lawns just to have an excuse to stay outside and catch the next Karen episode. I'd wake up, open the blinds, and half expect a camera crew to pop out of the bushes, yelling, "Welcome to suburban justice." But even after 2 sheriff visits and a public humiliation, Karen wasn't done. Oh no, she wanted revenge. She just didn't realize the harder she tried, the deeper she was digging her own hole. It started on a Sunday morning. The HOA newsletter hit everyone's mailbox. A full 4 pages of Karen-style propaganda. Right there on page 1, in bold, was an announcement. Emergency HOA regulation. Unauthorized driveway extensions will be demolished. Now, I didn't have a driveway extension, but I knew exactly who she meant. Me. She had somehow convinced herself that if my driveway didn't exist, I couldn't call the sheriff about her blocking it again. That's how her brain worked. Cause and chaos. Within hours, I heard the rumble of an old pickup truck and saw 2 guys in neon vests walking around my property holding clipboards. "You fellas lost?" I asked. One of them said, "We got a work order from the HOA president. Says we're supposed to remove an unauthorized driveway expansion. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. Buddy, that driveway's been here since 2003. You touch it, you're trespassing. They looked nervous. Maybe we should call her first. Please do, I thought. They stepped aside, dialed her number, and a few minutes later, Karen herself came marching down the street, clipboard in hand, like some kind of suburban general. She pointed dramatically at my concrete. This entire section is non-compliant. It violates our community symmetry policy. Community symmetry, I asked, trying not to choke from laughing. Is that in the U.S. Constitution or just in your head? She puffed up. This isn't funny. You can't keep defying the HOA, Karen, I said calmly. That's county property. I poured it with a permit. You start digging it up, and you're committing vandalism. The workers looked at each other, clearly realizing they'd been dragged into a circus. One whispered, "Ma'am, we're not touching that without paperwork." But Karen wasn't listening. She stomped onto my driveway, took out a can of bright red spray paint, and started marking X's all over the concrete like she was reclaiming stolen land. That's when I took out my phone and hit record. She froze mid. What are you doing? Just documenting my vandalism evidence, I said with a grin. Oh, you wouldn't dare. Oh, I would. She turned around, waving her arms at the workers, demanding they continue the demolition. They refused. So, in a fit of suburban rage, she decided to start scraping my driveway herself with a garden trowel. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so insane. I called the sheriff's office again, half embarrassed to even explain it. But when I said her name, the dispatcher sighed like she'd heard it 100 times. "Karen from Maple Lane again?" she asked. "The one and only." 10 minutes later, the same deputy rolled up, lights flashing just enough to set the tone. Karen froze, hands still gripping her trowel like it was a smoking gun. "Ma'am," the deputy said, "please step away from the driveway." Karen tried her usual routine. "This man's violating community code." The deputy looked at me. "Do you have your permit paperwork?" I smiled, handed it over. "County approved, stamped, dated." He looked back at her. "He's compliant, ma'am." "You're the one trespassing again," she sputtered. "That's not trespassing. I'm the HOA president." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "And I'm the sheriff. You're still trespassing." The neighbors had gathered by now. Phones out, recording, whispering, laughing. Someone even brought popcorn. One of the kids yelled, "Karen's going to jail again," which didn't help. The deputy sighed, then asked her for ID. She hesitated. I don't have it on me." That was her second mistake. The first was thinking she could intimidate law enforcement again. The deputy radioed her name in, and the response came back fast. Apparently, that pending review from last time had escalated. The county had officially issued a second warrant for her failure to comply with her court appearance. The deputy looked genuinely tired at this point. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." The crowd gasped. Karen's jaw dropped. "You're arresting me again for protecting my neighborhood." "Ma'am," he said, "you're being detained for violating your release conditions and for vandalism." You could hear a pin drop, and then suddenly half the neighborhood burst into applause. Someone actually started chanting, "Choey, no more." As they walked her toward the patrol car, she shouted over her shoulder, "This isn't over. I'll sue all of you. I just waved, and said, "Get your lawyer to park legally next time." That clip went viral in the neighborhood chat within the hour. By evening, it was on Facebook with the caption, "Karen versus the Sheriff, Round 2. A few days later, the HOA board sent a formal letter announcing that Karen had been removed from her position pending investigation. The tone was professional, but you could practically feel the relief between the lines. And as for me, I got a written apology from the board. The sheriff stopped by to say, "Nice catch," and my driveway stayed exactly where it was. Bright red X's and all. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock. It backs up into your driveway with flashing lights and a warrant. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every single subscription motivates me to bring you even more exciting and dramatic HOA stories. And don't forget to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. I'll see you in the next story where justice gets even more satisfying.